Super excited for joining forces with our friends from Economist Engineering to host this event. As a host, I just wanted to let you know that we're not planning any fire alarms tonight, so if you do hear any alarm, it's probably a real thing. So please follow our security guys just outside and they'll take you to the safe place. And on that note also, I want to thank the Telegraph Engineering and Economist Engineering team, so please give them a round of applause for making this event a success. And before we want to invite Mark Brinkhat, CTO of Economist, to come and talk about the agenda and hand over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Mehdi. Well, welcome. Thanks for coming. I hope you really enjoy this evening. We have a packed agenda, and the aim of today is to talk a bit about technology in publishing and why publishing is cool for technology. Yeah? So to start us off, we have Tom Standage, who's going from The Economist, who's going to be talking a bit about his experiences, doing that line between journalism and technology. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with the deputy head of products from The Economist, the head of technology from The Telegraph, and we have a guest from a company called Naoris, who's the Fernando CTO from Naoris. And we have also a guest from The Telegraph, who's Harry, who's the technology intelligence editor from the Telegraph. Followed that, we'll have two talks, one about my Telegraph and one about DevOps and software reliability engineering from The Economist DevOps practice lead, Jujar. So I hope you really enjoy this evening. I'm looking forward to meeting you after in the networking break. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Is this mic going? It'd be easier just to use this one. Okay, I'll use the handheld. I'll do what I'm told. Okay, I'll get stand over here. Hi, so I'm Tom Standage. I'm deputy editor at The Economist with special responsibility for digital stuff. And I'm here today to be like the human glue. And I am the glue between a bunch of things. The first is that I've been at The Economist for 20 years now. And I write about tech there, but I also think about how we use it and what editorial projects and products we ought to be doing next. We've done our first augmented reality piece this year. Over the years, I am to blame for various apps and things that we have made and products that we've launched and Economist films and things like that. But before that, I was at the Daily Telegraph for 2 years, also covering tech. So I've worked at both of the news organizations that have organized this event here today. So I'm a glue in that sense between the two. But I'm also a glue in another way between hacks, between journalists and hackers and techies. And this is because originally, back in the 80s, probably before most of you were born, I wanted to do AI. And so I went to university because I was going to build AIs, because I'd read all like Asimov robot stories and everything, and I was like, okay. And it was like the 80s, and we all had personal computers, and were building chatbots and stuff like that. Unfortunately, AI didn't work in the 1980s. It was rubbish. It was like expert systems and Prolog, and it just really couldn't do much at all. And so that career plan of mine didn't really work out. And I ended up doing a bit of programming work after university and a bit of tech journalism on the side. And then the internet showed up, and suddenly there was this demand for journalists who knew about the internet, and there weren't any. So I went to The Guardian first, and I worked on their tech pages for a year. And while I was there, I also built their first website. So that was kind of my first proper job in journalism. And I was programming in Perl half the time and building these horrible scripts that took XML from, what was it, Quark copy desk. God, it was terrible. And it was before Mac OS was like properly multi-threaded. So when one Mac crashed, all of them crashed at the same time. It was really spectacular. Anyway, so I was building websites and also writing about this exciting new thing, the internet, while I was there. And from there I went to the Telegraph and so on. Why am I telling you all this? Well, because today our aim is to encourage you to think about coming to work for a publisher, coming to work for a news organization in particular. And I've spent my career at the interface between what journalists do and what technologists do within news organizations. So I think I'm in a good position to make the case to you. And we're going to have some other people who are going to make their version of the case to you as well. But I thought I'd give you sort of my take on this to start with. because you could work in any industry, essentially, with software engineering skills. Everybody needs them. So it's kind of up to you. Do you want to go and work at an insurance company or a bank, or where do you want to go and work? What do you want to do? Why work for a news publisher? Well, here's three reasons. And this is a kind of classic economist thing. An economist leader always has three reasons for everything, or three things that have to be done. It's never four, it's never two, it's always three. So the rule of threes, here it is. The first reason, I think, is neophilia. So one thing that techies and journalists have in common is they're always looking for the next new thing. And we get a massive buzz from being the first to find stuff out as journalists, and we're all on Twitter the whole time because that's where, when other people find stuff out, where it tends to be put first, and we want to beat everyone else with the story, and we're always looking for kind of new angles and new stories and new things to report. And I think something is the same is very, very true that in the world of technology, we're all interested in the next thing, what's going to come next, what's the new technology, how can we use it, how can we jump on it. And of course, technology journalism itself is absolutely where these two obsessions collide, and you have very, very nerdy journalists writing about, what's going to be in the next iPhone or whatever. So I think that is a very natural cultural fit. And the buzz of a newsroom where, when news breaks and you can hear that something's going on and there's a real buzz. And of being on that cutting edge of information is a very, very common thing. So I think if you're into that, you'll probably fit right in a news organization. The second thing is that I think we're doing some quite interesting things. The news business is a legacy industry. It's not renowned for moving terribly quickly, printing presses and all that sort of thing. But actually, if you look at what's going on, there's an awful lot of new technology being used in interesting ways. We're going to hear more about this at the moment. But it's definitely not the place to come if you want to do like Fortran programming on a mainframe. Go to the insurance companies for that, or the airlines. But news organizations, we're doing much more interesting things. I mean, I was in a meeting the other day and we were using decision tree machine learning to analyze the customer journeys to our website, and I just thought, this is great. We're actually using this, and obviously we're building things like smart speaker systems, and we got an LSTM recurrent neural network, and we fed it 10 years of science coverage at The Economist, and then we asked it to write an article about AI, and it was absolutely terrible. I mean, it was all about like sending sound waves to the back of the sun. It was the individual sentences sort of looked like English, and they sort of had full stops at the end and verbs in the right place. But it was absolute nonsense. And one of the things that the machine learning systems can't do is narrative. So they're very good at kind of making up hamster names, but they're not very good at writing novels. But anyway, there's the fact that we're trying this, and we're involved in. There's a big Stanford project that's trying to kind of build a machine learning system that can recognize trustworthy news. There is exciting stuff being done here, and we're involved with it. And I think the fact that the technology of news distribution itself has become a political issue is quite interesting. This whole problem with fake news and how can you trust a publisher and how can you trust an article and is there an inherent bias in this platform against this kind of news and so on. This isn't just a technology problem, and it's not just a journalism problem. It's a much broader problem, and fixing it is going to require some quite interesting collaboration between some unexpected parties, I think. So there's interesting stuff going on here, and there's interesting problems to solve. And then the third, and I think probably the most important reason that I would say think about working for a news organization, is that we are basically purpose-driven organizations. We have a mission to help people understand the world, and a vibrant free press is a really important part of a healthy democracy. And when it isn't so vibrant and free, then you can see the kinds of bad things that happen. Now, it has to be said that not all news organizations are equal in this regard. Not all of them are necessarily helping. But if you are, I think, here or at The Economist, then you are at an organization that's trying to leave the world a better place than it found it. It's not, neither of us have ad-based models that involve, chasing clicks and that encourage us to favor clickbait over actual news. We're serious about journalism, and we have predominantly subscription-based business models. So we live or die by what our readers think about our content, and in particular, whether they think it's worth continuing to pay for it. And that's really, a big difference. They have to feel they're getting value from it. And so if they do continue to feel that, then that does suggest that we're doing something useful for the world. There are lots of problems in the world, and fixing them requires people to be well informed. So it's not the answer to everything, but it is part of the answer. I was told recently that we interviewed a a developer who was currently working for a betting website, and he was saying, I'm not sure that I am actually doing a good thing for the world. I'm basically building the most kind of, most addictive website I can, and is that really what I want to do? Similarly, working in ad tech, that's great. You can come up with user interface designs that make people click when they didn't want to, and things like that. If you don't want to do that kind of thing and you want to build products that make the world better, not worse, then I think a news organization is a good place to come and work. So those are my 3 reasons, but don't take my word for it. We're now going to have a panel of other people, and we're going to dig into all of this a bit more. So what's it like to work at a news organization? What sorts of technologies are we using? What kinds of stuff are we building? What does the interface between hacks and hackers look like in the real world? And to discuss all of this, I'd like to welcome our panelists. So I hope they're not too surprised by that. Richard, have you got a mic on? Good. Okay, brilliant. So please welcome Richard Holden, who's the Deputy Head of Product at The Economist, Mehdi Ali, who's the Head of Technology at The Telegraph, Harry de Quetteville, who is the Special Correspondent for Technology at The Telegraph, and Fernando Martino, who is the CTO of Nauris, which is a blockchain stroke cybersecurity company that we've just been talking a lot about side chains. And they're using quantum crypto as well, so apparently it's completely buzzword compliant. But the idea is that he's going to give us an external perspective on these sorts of things. So there we go. Oh, brilliant. We've got enough chairs now as well, so I'm going to scoot over here. Okay, I'm going to start with you, actually, Richard and Mehdi. What's it like to work as a techie at a news organisation, and how does it compare with other places that you've worked? Why don't you go first, Mehdi?
Okay, so I've spent quite a lot of time working for publishers. I have seen this disruption started when we talked about all of the Facebook disruption started back in 2009-10. It doesn't stop. It is always changing, and it is very, very fast paced. And it's like, sometimes when we refer to our brand as like 163 years, the brand has been around, but the technology is very contemporary and very modern.
175, sorry. I couldn't help it.
Facts. We'll catch up.
Yeah, okay. No, you won't.
I know. That was a joke.
Yeah, all right.
So join forces.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Cool. No, so this is, it is quite exciting, and it is very, very fast paced, and change is happening, and is happening in real time. And I think I heard it from somebody else that it is, it's never been as fast, but it will be never be that slow again. So yeah.
What about you, Richard?
I suppose being a product manager rather than an actual full-on techie myself, I suppose I find myself like in the worst of both worlds, where to the editorial I look like a techie, and to the techies I look like completely clueless. But being the techie in the publishing organization, it's interesting because I think as a product person I try and bridge the gap. Like I have to try and bridge the gap between expectations, why do things work, why are things easy and not easy. Obviously we want to push forward and do lots of new things and with tech, but half the battle is making sure that we're doing the basic stuff, the stuff that our subscribers really want to do right, and that can actually be the hardest stuff of all. And a lot of it is actually about trying to make the case of why that's important, why we need good engineering practices and good tech practices in order to make sure, we're serving our readers in the best way we can, even if it's not the most glamorous thing.
Now, this is a very deadline-driven world, and in particular, the rule is do the best job you can by the deadline. That's the journalism rule, because the deadline's not going to move. How does working in a kind of deadline-driven organisation, how does that connect with the way that software works, where you can't just kind of go, well, it's kind of as near as we're going to get by this date, so that'll do. Is there a clash there?
Definitely, and I think it's not just in the deadline, it's also in the attitude to how things are released, I think. Where, in the journalism, you've got do the best you can before the deadline, it's out, it's done, what's the next thing? Where in software, obviously, that's completely opposite, where you can get the best you can out, but the whole point is you don't stop there, you will iterate. So we have the catharsis of publication as journalists, which you never really get. Software's never done. Yeah, you release it and you go, oh God, now my problems really begin. I think that's different. So getting across that different way of looking at things and trying not to talk about, but use things like words like minimum viable product is very common in the product world, but I think to editorial can mean, crappy version that you'll make do with, but never actually do anything with after that. So trying to bridge the language there a little bit as well.
Oh yeah, stories. Yeah, people talking about stories and sprints and things, and the journalist thinks a story is something else. So that's watch out for that one. Harry, let me ask you, what's your experience been on sort of the walking along this border between tech and journalism from the other side?
It's been fantastic, really, because I get to do bigger projects here, and I do long reads and series of maybe 5 or 6 quite long articles stitched together. I've done a couple about the development of the tech industry in Britain, and one about how to future-proof your children in various, in education and finance, as in technology developing. And so you're given, editor gives you a brief, and you then go and research it, and then you used to just deliver your copy. That was what my process used to be in 20 years as a foreign correspondent, all the rest of it. You just handed over the words, that was it, apart from the queries which might come back. Now, you work with a whole team of other people. It might be video, designers, but also coders who are trying to illustrate and convey your story in a rich, multi-format method. And that is fantastic. To begin with, you're like, I'm the master, this is my beat, I'll tell you what to do. And then quite quickly, it's a really pleasurable process where you work with people who are obviously brilliant in their own fields, and they make your story come alive. I mean, these 2 series I was doing, there were animators sort of, making graphics move and illustrate quite complicated stuff that I was doing. And so quite quickly you begin about how you're going to tell stories in a different way, because it's not just words anymore. It's all this stuff from graphics which move and animate and interviews, video inserts, all that requires coders, requires people who can can think creatively about technology.
It requires us journalists to think about things differently as well. My experience has been that some of them are up for it and some of them aren't, and are like, oh, this is really annoying that the internet's come along and now my job is much more complicated. And I'm sure people said the same thing about the telephone. But have you seen that kind of variation? And what is it that kind of gets people, what, if anything, makes people change their mind about the value of this?
But there's one thing and one thing only. And I think journalists have been very reluctant to embrace the internet and rightly so, because the internet in many publishing models was adopted, and journalists chucked out what we thought was good about journalism. We stopped doing the stuff which was good, which was proper journalism with resources to investigate and, as you put it, explain the world. We went after a clickbait-led model of ads and clicks. I'm talking some people, some publishers, there was a lot of that.
Department at the Daily Telegraph whose job was to come in at 6 o'clock in the morning and copy out the Daily Mail for a couple of years. But fortunately you got rid of that.
So you just had this, you had this model, and journalists were rightly skeptical. You're just saying, we are now hamsters on the hamster wheel. What is the point of this? And thank God we have moved away from that, because, as you say, our customers have seen that there's no value in it. And if our customers don't see the value in it, I don't see why journalists should have done.
I fully agree with that, absolutely. So I think new models are emerging, and it's very striking that we've ended up, and a lot of publishers, the New York Times as well, we've all ended up in the same place, which is sort of emphasizing subscription models and trying to get away from the way that the ad-based model just bends the world out of shape. And there's no better example of that than what's happening with Facebook.
And I mean, just to make, you started, you made that Guardian website 20 plus years ago.
There was no paywall on it, so I
but what I'm saying is that this started 25 years. It's taken us a quarter of a century to work out what the right business model for the internet, or what might be a viable business model. So it has been 25 years of uncertain and often gloomy times, right?
I've interviewed Alan Rusbridger several times over that period, and I'd always say, is this free model for The Guardian really going to work? And he'd say, well, it's still early days for the internet. And he was still saying that in 2011. And I said, no, I was there in 1995, and it was, I think we've had long enough, and I don't think the free model... Anyway, they're making a go of it. They've got their version of the membership subscription model, and it does seem to be working for them. So I think that it's good. I suppose this is part of this, that in any industry you have to go and look at who are the healthy players in that industry, and who do you want to shackle your wagon to, and I think the business model divide is very, very clear in this business about those that are focused on reader revenue versus advertising revenue. Fernando, I wanted to come to you. Trust in news distribution has become a political issue. And I wondered what you thought about the potential for using technology as part of the answer to improve the way that people feel about journalism and about its trustworthiness. Do you think there's a role there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I in this new world of fake news, and And I don't even know what fake news means anymore.
But it means any news you don't like that makes you look
probably
bad.
yeah. So
Facebook prefers the term false news because when Trump says fake news, he just means you're making me look bad. Shut up.
Absolutely.
So let's use false news instead.
So there is a fundamental role, but I think it's just a part of it, which is there are technologies such as blockchain that can actually give that trust. You don't even need to think about trust because that's inherently to the actual technology you're using. Yeah. So it brings trust to where in trustless environments, And one of the things that people are thinking now is when you go to political debates, if you have, for example, your content, all your news across the blockchain, you get that single truth at that point in time.
Well, it has to be true in the first place, though, before you...
But you get that news at that point in time, yeah? And then what you can do is, with applying AI on top of blockchain, you can in real time, if Trump says something like, oh, I didn't say I'll pay her $1 million, in real time, you can get all the stuff that he said around that he gets, he said, I would pay $1 million if whatever, It
turns out that it doesn't make much difference when you point out that he lied.
There is yeah.
But I know there are people using facial recognition, for example, to cover Senate hearings. And they have it's the Sunlight Foundation that does this, I think. And there's a Senate hearing on a certain topic and some senator gets up and says, I think it would be a great idea to build this pipeline. And it then identifies them and says, this is how much money all the oil companies and that's something that you could do in theory, but you'd need to be superhuman fast, looking stuff up and recognizing people. And so I think that's quite a nice example. And it's not as fully buzzword compliant as the one you've just mentioned, but I think there is
more. So what that type of technology helps to solve is that problem, but it does bring the problem to do I actually trust in that journalist?
Right.
What is he saying? Yeah. But then you can pick up and say, these are all the stories this journalist has done over time, yeah? And it's there on the blockchain with a timestamp you can't change. So what that means is now you can have content analyzers, you can have AIs and verify all different type of sources and verify if that journalist is really trustworthy or not. So a combination of several things that you can do can start to bring some trust, not only on that story did happen at that point in time, because one of the things I always say to everyone that talks to me about blockchain is, in any technology used today, if you have the right admin access to it, you can change something that says 400 3 years ago to 500. You're looking at your screen and you're seeing 500 now. For you, that's the truth at that point in time. But somebody changed that truth 3 years ago. With blockchain, you can't do that.
Right, because you have to change the whole blockchain. What do you think about this, Harry? Do you think there's scope for... Because there was this startup called Civil that was doing an ICO and they were selling tokens. And as far as I could see, they had big problems with their model and no one bought their tokens anyway, so they've kind of given up on Tuesday this week. But just because they've failed, does that mean that this isn't going to work? Do you think there's scope for blockchain in this field?
The verification of fake news or debunking of it, I think, is incredibly difficult because as far as I can see, it doesn't matter whether you check if it's true or not, or if it's verified. In a particularly polarized world that we live in anymore, there are legions of Trump fact checkers. Yeah. They exist already. It makes no difference at all. I think it would be a terrible shame if politically we thought that somehow there was a solution to problems as we identify them, and then said blockchain is the solution. That is a technological solution to a technological problem. It is not a political solution to a political problem. And if we begin to conflate that stuff, we will be very, very disappointed.
Amen. The other thing is Trump seems to actually be quite on the ball with this. So when the Access Hollywood tape came out, he said that he basically tried to defend himself. And then about 6 months later, Adobe did that demo of Voco where it's basically Photoshop for sound. And then he started saying that the tape could be a fake. And deep fakes means that he could deny if the P tape comes out, then he can just say, well, it's a deep fake. And what are we going to do? So I'm not sure. Anyway, speaking of exciting technologies, but probably not deep fakes, Richard and Mehdi, give us some examples of some cool technologies that you're using and the kind of exciting cutting edge things that you're doing to get these people really excited. What examples have we got? Not Fortran, please.
Okay, cool. So, in terms of the data technology, we're fully engaged with Google. So, we're obviously taking all of the data, every move, every click that our consumers are doing on our products, and using that data. We're also using AWS. So it isn't about just the infrastructure, but it's about what actually is the problem and solve those problems with the right set of technology and solve that. The business that we are in. So this is effectively the stack that we're using here at the Telegraph, and we're also serving our content through Adobe Experience Manager and some of our customers and different type of tests using Adobe stack.
I'll let you go first because I was trying to avoid remembering what most of the tech stack is and let other people deal with that. But I think for us, we released a new app a few months ago, and I think it was a good moment for The Economist because. In terms of, it's a React Native app for iOS only at the moment, but I think the most important thing about it was the way it connected to our content platform that is a new way of serving content to our clients inside the business and so trying to, rather than, the cool thing I think about that really, it's not that sexy, but it's the fact that we're trying to do these things in a sustainable way that we can reuse across our products rather than like every single product that we've done in the past having its entirely new way of distributing content and we've having to build everything from scratch. We're actually trying to join that stuff up in a way that's a lot more sensible and means we can iterate a lot faster and make new products a lot faster as well.
Okay, and I wanted to ask specifically about the role of machine learning. When we say AI, we really mean supervised deep learning, really, don't we? But the use of this, it's basically all supervised deep learning. But when is there a use for that in this business? Should it be used in the newsroom? Is it something that we can use in analytics? This is an exciting technology we all get to play with that is actually being adopted. So, what's your role? AI in the newsroom, is that?
Well, as I said before about when editorial decisions are taken away from journalists, you can get in pretty sticky water, hot water quite quickly. And I think with powerful machine learning rationales, you quite quickly arrive at a decision where the editor is no longer the editor. Because analytics are saying, this story did really well, look at all the registrations and subscribers it brought in, even in a subscription-based model, not a click-based model, let's do more of that. And, I think that ultimately, a journalistic job is not an individual story-based job. It is a curatorial-based job across a product, right? The sports section, the business section, the news section, features, book reviews. It's that curatorial global view that makes people tune in ultimately. And if we get to a situation where, deep learning algorithms are saying, look at this analysis of Liverpool's formation against Watford last Tuesday. That was brilliant. More of that, please. It's over. Right. I
remember someone at the Telegraph saying they'd done a survey of how many people read the foreign pages in the print edition. You probably remember this as a foreign correspondent. And the answer was not very many. And so they could get rid of them and make more room for other kinds of coverage. But so then when they said to people, how about we get rid of them then, since you don't seem to be reading it as much as some of the other sections, everyone said no, because they want the option to read it. And it's the value of the bundle that is actually what they're paying for. And they're going to value some bits of it more on some days.
And also it's image, right? The Economist, more than anything, know your arse from your elbow. You are part of the brand is about making people feel intelligent, and having a breadth of foreign interest is part of that. Ditch it at your peril.
I wondered if Richard and Mehdi had any thoughts on the role of machine learning anywhere in one of these businesses.
Yeah, it's interesting because we we released this new app a few months ago, but that was the second attempt at it. And the first attempt, I think we'd all got quite excited and gone, we know The Economist is a full thing to read every week. It's quite a tricky thing for people to get through front to back, unless you're Bill Gates. And so, we'll use machine learning. We'll work out what people are into and just give them, stories they're interested in. But that was actually incredibly wrong-headed. We realised for similar reasons that when we had another go, we realised that and did a bit more user research that we realised people actually really valued our curation, which we probably should have realised first time. Our curation, and we were worried that people would respond really badly to the fact that The Economist was telling people what to read. But no, that's what they pay us to do. It was great. So I think the role is always going to be, if we do use that in the sort of curation side of things, it's going to always be as an augmentation to the editorial curation at most. But yeah, very light touch or something very, very carefully considered.
Yeah, just very quickly, some of this intelligence stuff is based on what you're writing and giving you recommendations while you're writing it, not necessarily saying you can actually submit that and consumers will read this and it'll give you extra clicks. But it's giving and helping and creating that process and making that more efficient, so it saves time in trying to dig out, oh, where did I find this or that. So
it's suggesting stories you might want to do, further reading at the bottom. It can kind of say these are similar stories.
And also helping the editors and writers to get recommendation while they're writing this, that this is the same topic was discussed here.
Yeah, you don't look very convinced by that, Harry.
Well, it's sort of auto-complete my sentence.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Google.
hang on.
Gmail.
Look for Gmail. Well, I know, Gmail, that's fine. I mean, if Gmail wants to do that, fine. But, it starts doing it on my articles, I'm going to get pissed off.
Well, the one I like is the system that suggests the tags for your story. So, like, no one wants to tag their story when they've written it. It's like, oh. But if you've got a thing that says, okay, here are 10 tags you might want, and Barack Obama is always one of them, because he's, like, in everything. And every story is about Barack Obama. But so having a kind of first stab at it, which you can then prune, would be a quicker way of doing it. Fernando, I wanted to come back to you because you've got clients in many industries now, and I think in the past you've worked in data and analytics in a variety of areas. And I just wondered what your take was on how the media business and publishing compares with other businesses and its willingness to try new things. Do you find that other financial services is much faster moving or slower moving? What's your perspective?
Yeah, they tend to be a bit faster in terms of trying technologies, but implementing, I think they're probably more or less at the same level. But there are other areas where the media industry is a lot faster. But media is so big.
Yep.
So if you talk about newspaper and publishers' business, it's very different. Yeah. So I think that there's many other sectors that are going at a completely different pace, using AI, When Amazon look at exactly that problem, curation versus, suggestions, they found out that, it had to be a mix of both. And people really love the recommendations, that they provide. And guess what? That had it extremely well for that P&L,
So you have a mixture of curation, and then you kind of have a certain percentage of it is recommended.
And I think there is a role as well for AI for journalists because, the people are creating all of that content, which is suggesting, look at these videos, all the libraries that you have out there, because while you're writing, the AI can understand more or less what is the right stuff that can help you, being an image, being a video, being whatever you want to use, whatever media you want to use as part of that story. So there's still a lot of room to, it's all about innovation. If you go at what are the problems that you're trying to solve, but you need to understand really at the core if it is a problem or not, And
I've been making a podcast series for the past couple of months with Slate in the US, and I don't know how we'd have done it without, we're using this transcription service called Trint, which transcribes everything on your tape, but then you can copy and paste bits of it into a script, and it tells you the time code, and there's another one called Descript, which is kind of halfway to Voc. I mean, this is all being done basically with machine learning based voice recognition, but it's an amazingly powerful and useful tool. And then just Google Docs. I mean, being able to collaborate on an edit between 4 different computers in different countries. It's not a terribly exciting technology, but it's an amazingly useful thing to be able to do. So I think as long as we're sticking to our journalistic principles, there are ways that we can take advantage of these,
there's
new tools.
Something else I want to add to that. Microsoft is actually investing tremendously on surfacing a lot of the AIs that they are developing by allowing people to use bots to get to that very quickly. And I have no doubt they are going in the right direction because bots are going to be used everywhere for all different type of things. And I think there's a lot of room if you start to look really at what these technology companies are doing at that level, then you can innovate and see how can I use this actually now in my organization. There's a lot of room for that,
Cool. Okay, well, I wanted to give you a chance to ask a question or two. So do we have any questions from the floor for any of our panelists? You want to ask them about anything at all? Question over here. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to pick you up on the paying for proper news model.
Yeah.
So obviously on that model, you're going to miss out. A lot of people are just not going to get that. So isn't there an imperative on the part of journalists to figure out the tech?
Metered paywall.
The news out?
Metered paywall is the answer, I think, which means that you get a certain number of stories. The other thing is that you'll see, say, US newspapers drop the paywall for, say, disaster coverage or hurricane coverage or anything. And we do this too. It looks like you're profiteering when you paywall certain stories. And so we'll unpaywall, when there's an obituary that everyone wants to read. It just looks really bad if you put up a toll booth with an obituary. So I think there's enough flexibility around the paywall model. And the FT, in fact, invented that model. And I think the hard watertight paywall model that the Times has, for example, is a mistake because it means you can't do social promotion. You can also do social promotion with a metered paywall. And it's only when people hit the third article that they see the paywall.
I would like to pick up on that because that's an extremely good point. I think there's a role on blockchain to allow you to create different business models. There's more than 2 billion people on the planet that they don't have a bank account. They will never be able to access the economist.
How do they get to blockchain?
2 billion micropayments. So there are people in Africa, and I'm working with one of those organizations that are doing similar to what WeChat did in China. I don't know, many of you.
Oh, this is M-Pesa in Kenya. Yeah, it's the biggest micropayments.
M-Pesa is one of the things that is happening there. But it is really about creating a new way for people to pay and access content. If you start to innovate around business models and enable micropayments of people just using and say, hey, here is a bit of Bitcoin I have access to.
We might have to agree to disagree on that one.
Yeah, it's a different discussion. But, it starts to create even business models because if you go to China, and I was there recently, I was surprised how everything now, last time it wasn't like that, but now, you go to a restaurant, you just scan something that is on the menu, you pay with your phone, just a QR code on every single menu, on everything. And if you think about that, the only thing you substitute in that type of environment is instead of you paying with dollars, in fiat money, it's just another way of payment, So micropayments, I have no doubt about what I'm saying is because I know some people are, including IBM, are investing a lot, and there's some big banks now exploring that, And the test bed is going to be Africa because, let's face it, some countries in Africa you have to travel with your boot full of money to actually do the weekly shopping,
I think that
solves a lot of problems.
That favours mobile payments. I'm not sure it favours micropayments, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And it's certainly interesting the way that China has changed in the last 2 or 3 years towards actually a willingness to pay for digital content.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any more questions from the floor? We have a question over here.
Just around the kind of curation point, I think, Harry, from you were making. I guess, where does curation kind of overlap with divination and knowing more than everybody else so that you are the best editorial team in the world? Do you think that people who play chess for a living and play Go for a living, who then got smacked by Deep Blue or whatever the latest technology, felt similar position to what you're feeling now?
Yeah, they probably did, and they probably thought there was something inherently artistic and creative about what they were doing, and then DeepMind proved them utterly wrong. So it may well be, but I'm speaking from a journalistic position of what we can add. What is it that we add? And my view very strongly is that we add quality and curation, and once we give those things up, we have very little to add. So we might as well at least fight from our strongest position of defense rather than just abandoning all to very shallow forms of journalism where we can, if we all wrote baseball reports, then we could all go home today because baseball reports can already be produced automatically. So we might as well fight from where we're, best defended.
I think we're being paid by our readers for our judgment, and they want and if we get it wrong a lot, then they'll stop paying us. And that's probably a bigger worry than someone will invent an AI that can do it. AI is bad at narrative, and the other thing is that one of the things we do is trend spotting, and we very often have covers that are not about that week's news. And if you just kind of did a massive amount of processing of what's in Google News, you wouldn't come up with the idea of putting whatever it is we're putting on the cover. So I think having off, particularly for a weekly, having sort of off news covers and doing these longer term trends, that's essentially what people are paying us for, and they're paying us for having the judgment to do that. So we do keep a very close eye on whether you could build a bundle of content similar to ours, using Flipboard and enough machine learning. But so far, it doesn't seem to be possible. So fingers crossed. And also that experiment that we did where we got a machine learning system to write a science article was diabolical. So novelists will also have a problem, and screenwriters and other people. So I think that's a relatively difficult thing to automate. Okay, well, I think we're now going to have a break, and then we're going to have 2 sessions, one from the Telegraph and one from The Economist. But please join me first in thanking our panellists.